Welcome to my session, After Endrew F, Building Family Partnerships Using Student-Collected IEP Progress Data. I'm Amy Pleet-Odle. I've combined 50 years of experience as an English teacher, special educator, transition coordinator, State Department specialist, college professor, and a parent in my consulting business, Inclusion-Focused Coaching. I haven't missed a CEC convention since 1995, and I always learn something that I can pass on to others. That's what it's all about, right? Learning something today that you can pass on to somebody else. So I hope you're going to learn something from me today in this presentation that you can use to be more effective. But more than that, I hope you're going to learn something that you can pass on to someone else. In the next few minutes, I'll fill in some background and review the essence of the Supreme Court decision, and then two strategic frameworks. I'll share stories of 3 students where these frameworks intersected. As you watch this presentation, I hope you'll write comments and questions in the chat. I'm going to try to monitor them throughout the conference, but I will definitely be live at the time this session is aired. At the end, I'll tell you how you can access my handouts. First, you're probably familiar with the Endrew F. Supreme Court decision of March 2017. There are 2 findings that are relevant for us here. First, IEP teams must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress, appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. In order to know if a child is making progress, we must have some method for progress monitoring, right? If you're a special educator, I'm sure you spend a majority of your time collecting data and reporting it to families. In too many cases, though, teachers tell me that progress monitoring takes too much time away from their supportive students, and they complain that it's meaningless paperwork that they send home that often parents don't even look at or don't know how to interpret. And I wonder what we can do to support parents to understand that. So that's the first finding from the Supreme Court decision we need to look at. And the second is that IEP teams must take steps to ensure meaningful parent involvement in the IEP meetings and ensure that their opinions are considered in establishing their child's goals and services. So, the Supreme Court decision requires us to rethink how we partner with families. Our recent pandemic shutdown has brought this issue to the forefront. When students are receiving a portion or maybe all of their schooling online, we have to involve families in new ways. Let's start with a strategic framework on family partnership. You may know that the United States Department of Education announced this version of the Dual Capacity Building Framework in 2019. It was created first by Karen Mapp of Harvard to provide a compass schools can use to promote the capacity of educators and families to build strong partnerships aimed at student and school improvement for all students. Let's look at this in a little detail. First, you'll see that it talks about the challenges that we must address for educators and for families. And then it goes into the essential conditions that must be in place if we're going to promote family partnerships, both process and organizational conditions that must be in place. And then it talks about whether there are policy and program goals to make improvements in the area of family engagement. Finally, it talks about the outcomes of building capacity of professionals, what will change for educators, and building the capacity of families and what will change for families. And the ultimate goal, as I said, is effective partnerships that support student and school improvement. You'll find a wealth of resources on the dualcapacity.org website aimed at building partnerships with all families. Now, let's turn a moment to think about families of students with disabilities. That same framework applies, but Burke and Goldman used the Blue-Banning et al. Principles for school-home collaboration and proposed 6 indicators of family-school partnership. They operationalize these 6 indicators into definitions and examples of observable practice by both practitioners and families. Although I can't go into depth here in this brief format, I expect you'll have no difficulty visualizing scenarios that evidence these indicators, as well as scenarios where one or more might be missing. Think about it: communication, commitment, equality, skills, trust, and respect. If we look at these through the lens of the dual capacity building framework, we'll see the importance of building the capacity of both educators and families in each of these 6 indicators. Now, I recently conducted a webinar for families on the topic of progress monitoring, and I realized that they needed to understand the distinction between the IEP goal, the intervention that's provided to the student, and the progress monitoring method. First, the goal needs to target the issue related to that student's disability that's interfering with progress in the general education curriculum. David Bateman calls that the student's driving needs. Yes, we want him to make progress in reading, math, writing, and social emotional development, but we want that for every student, right? What is the issue that this individual student struggles with? Don't we need to partner with families to determine that, especially now during virtual learning? Second, what intervention would work? There are numerous presentations in this conference that look at high leverage and evidence-based practices. Special educators and specialists will select one that is reasonably calculated to work. They will need to track these interventions. In some cases, it must be provided with fidelity to the protocol, and in other cases, it may be adapted to the student's individual circumstances. And then third, we need a progress monitoring method to see if the intervention is working. This method should be reasonable for educators to use and easy for families to understand. And what if we give students an opportunity to collect and report these data in ways that are meaningful for families? I'm going to give you 3 case study examples. In each of these cases, the IEP team is collecting data that will inform and strengthen partnerships with families. The intent is to align professional efforts, teachers, therapists, transition coordinators, and school counselors with family efforts, and then put students in the driver's seat. I have another presentation at this conference that focuses on putting SD into SDI. That's putting self-determination into specially designed instruction. These 2 workshops look at the same issue through different lenses. First case, Juan has a vision impairment. He has an IEP goal to improve his self-advocacy. He and his team know that learning to speak up for himself when he doesn't understand a concept or he doesn't understand instructions or he can't see the materials will be critical to his transition outcomes. The team created a sample list of self-advocacy actions that they would like to see him take in class, like these: ask the teacher a question, ask for enlarged tests, or ask for a seat change. His intervention support from professionals around him and his family is to help him develop these new behaviors. The first week, a teacher or a paraprofessional collected baseline data. She counted how often he took one of those 3 actions in ELA, that's green, in math, that's blue, and tech ed, that's red. With 5 classes in a week, you can see that he spoke up less than once per class, especially in English. Then, in week 2, one of his teachers met with him to brainstorm the list and add others that he thought of, like ask a friend. And then she passed the baton to him and asked him to tally how often he spoke up. Do you see the result over time? Now, they could have a conversation with him and his family about why he advocates less in ELA than he does in tech ed or math. Is it because he doesn't need to? Maybe his English teacher uses UDL? Or is it that he doesn't feel safe there? So obviously we need to look at some other data like his grades and teacher observations of his progress. By the way, do you notice that his score in Tech Ed dropped significantly between week 4 and week 6? Do you wonder why? Well, it turns out that Mr. Wood, his Tech Ed teacher, knew that Juan was on the list for students with IEPs, and he knew that he had a visual impairment, but he saw that Juan wore glasses. Until Juan started advocating for himself, Mr. Wood didn't realize that there were times when Juan couldn't see the screen or couldn't see the demonstration. So Mr. Wood started making some adjustments in the way he provided instruction to Juan, and Juan didn't need to advocate as often. The most important issue here isn't the data, but Juan's growth in self-advocacy and in his confidence, and perhaps how his advocacy impacts other indicators of his success. This method of progress monitoring will spark collaborative conversations between educators and with Juan's family. Second case, Stephen is on the autism spectrum and generally avoids interacting with his peers. Both his ELA and math teacher routinely give students collaborative learning opportunities every day in class, in person or online. For his IEP goals related to interactive skills, his teacher or paraprofessional tracked how many verbal interactions he had with his peers during those collaborative learning moments. During that time, he could earn 1 point for initiating a question, another if he responded to a peer's question, another if he acknowledged that peer's response, and 1 for complimenting a peer's contribution. They track 5 days a week, every other week. As you can see, Stephen was earning less than 1 point per class. Then his speech therapist asked him about his future goals, and he agreed he should apply pragmatic conversation routines that he was learning with the speech therapist into his in-class collaborative learning opportunities. There's more to this story, of course. It wasn't magic. This speech therapist collaborated with Stephen's ELA and math teachers so they knew what to reinforce in class. The plan and the pragmatic language routines were shared with Stephen's mother too, so she could reinforce at home. As he gained confidence, one of his teachers taught him how to track his own data, assigning himself points when he spoke up using one of the pragmatic language routines in one of these 4 options. Incidentally, Stephen shared this graph of his progress at his IEP meeting, explaining the whole team, including his mother, why he wanted to get better at conversations. And now, Cassie, my favorite story. She's the one I use in my other presentations, so I can be briefer here. Cassie recognized that the biggest challenge with her ADHD was focus. She was very aware that it interfered with her completing learning tasks. During week 3, one of her teachers met with her, taught her an evidence-based metacognitive strategy, and invited her to practice it during the math warm-up part of the lesson, and later during the ELA opening drill. As she became more proficient with the executive skills of focus and task completion, her scores on the initial activities in both subjects improved. And yes, Cassie learned to collect, tabulate, and graph her own data too. When she showed her parents this graph of her improvement, the whole team aligned on supporting her toward her future goal of increasing her focus so she can become a nurse. Let's sum up the steps you would take to replicate what I've demonstrated here. Remember that we are partnering with families every step of the way, especially if you're operating in virtual or hybrid learning environments. Step 1, clarify the intent of the IEP goal. Make sure that it's targeting a driving need that arises from that student's disability. Second, create an individualized data collection method. Maybe you can use some data that you're already collecting, but you're going to be looking at some aspect for this particular individual student. Third, collect baseline data, and then look at what that indicates. Fourth, select the intervention that you believe is most likely to lead to appropriate progress. Fourth, secure student agency. Explain the rationale and increase student buy-in for that strategy so that the student is on board with you. Then, as the student is ready, pass the data collection ownership on to the student. And then 7, review and collaborate. Collaborate with the student, collaborate with other professionals, and collaborate with the families. Here are some references if you're interested in diving deeper into any of the topics that I have explored in this presentation. And here's my contact information. Check out the free resources on my website and sign up to receive my blog. I do respond to email, and I would be glad to hear from you. At the bottom, you'll see a link to the handouts where you'll be able to access a copy of these slides. I hope that you gain some information and that you will use it and pass it along to others. Thanks for joining.